place, with the release of Elemental, it is now time once again to rank all the Pixar films. I love me some Pixar. They're one of my favorite animation studios. A majority of people on planet Earth have some level of fond memories of one of these Pixar films, one of these films in their catalog. Everybody's list is probably going to be pretty different. We have quite a lot of Pixar films to get to in this ranking, so without further ado, let's get into my last place pick. In last place, I have The Good Dinosaur. I've always thought The Good Dinosaur, every single time I've watched it, it's just fine. But when it comes to Pixar's eclectic catalog of films, I've always found this to be the most forgettable. It isn't terrible by any means, but the story in The Good Dinosaur never truly resonated with me, the characters also, and I just have never been a very big fan of the animation style that was showcased in the film. It's my least rewatched of all the Pixar films. At number 26, I have Brave, unfun Pixar entry. There are some fun elements to Brave, and that's why I have it a little bit higher than The Good Dinosaur, but the story at large is a bit all over the place. It never seems like it knows what it wants to be. I never understood the hype of Brave. It's kind of crazy looking back in retrospect that this was an Oscar-winning Best Animated Feature over films like Wreck-It Ralph, Frankenweenie, and Paranorman, who I would argue are at least several of them better than Brave. At number 25, I have Cars 2. I always feel horrible for the Cars fans in the comment section because I always rank these films so low, because honestly, Cars as a franchise probably is my least favorite Pixar franchise, and 2 is my least favorite of the Cars films. The racing element was one of the best parts of the first Cars, so it's weird to me that we shift all of that away in the sequel to have a spy thriller that's focused around Mater. Just an extremely weird choice on their part. I don't think it works as well as they had planned it to. Given the fact that we shift the focus back to Lightning McQueen in Cars 3, I like Mater. I think Mater is a fun supporting character, but overall, Cars 2 is kind of a miss for me. At number 24, I have Cars 3. Lightning McQueen gets the focus once again in Cars 3, and that is a big part into why I have Cars 3 just slightly higher than 2. While it's still not an amazing Pixar film in my opinion, I still like the overall story a bit more. I had so much more fun with this one because we are focusing back on the characters that I like and the racing elements which I love from the first one. The story could have been better with the less telegraphed twists and turns though, but overall, it's a fun time. At number 23, I have Finding Dory. Finding Dory as a film, it is like the textbook definition of a fine, serviceable, fun sequel. It's a decent extension of Finding Nemo, a film that I think is beloved by many, and since we do love Dory as a character, it was great getting to see her in the spotlight and getting to have this arc revolving around her parents. Not much about the film itself stands out all that much, but it's very harmless, disposable fun. At number 22, I have A Bug's Life. Now, I was actually a kid when this released in theaters. I remember going to see it in theaters, playing that PlayStation 1 game, and even back then, as a kid, I never understood the hype around Bug's Life, and I still have never bought into it as an adult. I do think the characters at large in A Bug's Life are fun. I do think the messaging all around is pretty solid, but among all of the classic Pixar films, I think this one has aged the poorest, and that isn't due to the fact that Kevin Spacey is the villain Hopper in this, although that has aged pretty poorly. But Hopper is a pretty intimidating villain. At number 21, I have Onward. This movie has so many cool concepts behind it because I am a very big fan of fantasy, and I do think that Chris Pratt and Tom Holland are pretty great charismatic leads. Those elements are Onward's biggest strengths. It's just the story, however, is where everything falls apart for me. There are moments of greatness sprinkled throughout the narrative, but not enough is here because it is bogged down by a weak supporting cast and a message that doesn't really resonate with me, and that is partially my fault given the fact that I am an only child, but hey, I can't help the fact I don't connect with the messaging. But it's an okay film. At number 20, I have Monsters University. It still is such an odd choice and concept to take Monsters, Inc. and then send it back to the college years, getting to see Sully and Mike grow up. And as a concept, as weird as it is, I do think it works quite well. It has that usual level of charm from Pixar that I've become accustomed to, and it always makes me laugh because of the goofy cast of characters. Like with any prequel though, it is very low stakes. You know they're not going to be in any imminent danger because it is a prequel, but it's still a fun inclusion into the Monsters, Inc. universe. I still need to watch that show they made that's on Disney+. Have any of you guys watched it? Make sure you share your thoughts about that in the comments section because I'm very curious. At number 19, I have the first Cars. I may not like Cars as a franchise overall, but I do have a pretty good time with the first Cars. This first one is fun, action-packed, and filled to the brim with charming characters, and I love the racing sequences in the film. Lightning McQueen as a character is awesome. It's a solid first film in the franchise. I do kind of wish, however, that this ended up being the quality we get in the other sequels. At number 18, I have Lightyear. Not gonna lie, on rewatch, I didn't like Lightyear as much as I initially did. It's still a film with a lot of things going for it. It's a fairly decent sci-fi adventure. Chris Evans is doing a great job with this new interpretation of Buzz Lightyear. It has some of the best looking Pixar visuals to date. However, on rewatch, when it debuted on Disney Plus, I do think it lacked a lot of the heart that these movies usually have, especially in that second half of the movie. It's where it started to lose me. It's still fun. Socks is a complete scene stealer, one of my favorite elements introduced, but definitely a weird inclusion in the Toy Story universe. At number 17, I have Elemental, the latest film from Pixar, and no pun intended, but I am very mixed on various elements of Elemental. Extremely ambitious for Pixar to tackle romantic comedy in a way like this, and that romantic comedy element in Elemental does have some charm to it. The animation is phenomenal like we expect from Pixar, but there's not enough here for it to be anywhere close to top tier Pixar, with the story overall being kind of muddled, unfortunately. Overall, it's an okay movie. It's very formulaic and safe, which is not what I want in a Pixar film these days, but I have a feeling that a lot of people are going to connect with the messaging behind it. At number 16, I have WALL-E. When it comes to a lot of these Pixar films, WALL-E is one that has grown on me as I've rewatched it over the years. I used to really not like it, but I've liked it a little bit more in recent years. It's honestly such a unique Pixar experience with how it tells its story, and WALL-E is such an endearing character, even though he doesn't say anything. But the first half of the film is the only thing I'm not that fond of when rewatching this. I think the second half of the film, though, extremely strong. I love the second half of the film. If the first half was as strong, I think this would be even higher in my list. At number 15, I have Incredibles 2. After waiting 14 years between films, we finally got a sequel to The Incredibles, and while I don't think it's as fantastic as the first Incredibles, it is a very fun sequel. The charm that made me love the first film so much still is here, and these characters continue to be so exciting with just these awesome superhero action sequences in this adventure, making for an extremely satisfying experience getting to see these characters once again. It was well worth the wait. However, if there is a third film in The Incredibles, please can we not wait another 14 plus years? At number 14, I have Luca. Film like Luca, I don't know how you can't find something like this so sweet and endearing. Honestly, I'm a sucker for a good friendship adventure, and the one in Luca is so strong. The messaging towards that friendship and facing your fears, I think is great. The animation style here is fresh, and it enhances pretty much everything about the film. The setting, the character designs, I have a blast every time I rewatch Luca. The only thing is I've never seen this in the theater. Please, one day, I hope to get to see Luca in a movie theater because they released it during the pandemic. At number 13, I have Up. Even outside of the completely soul-crushing opening sequence, I do have a lot of fun rewatching Up. I've always had such a great time going on this adventure with these characters because I like the cast that was assembled here. They're all very interesting. The emotional weight behind everything in Up is very high, and I think Ed Asner's performance is fantastic. Carl is such an endearing character, and it is a shame that Ed Asner has passed away, but we are getting one more short with Carl that's going to be airing in front of Elemental that I think is going to bring on a lot of emotions for all of us. At number 12, I have Turning Red. This might be kind of a hot take having Turning Red so high, but every single time I've watched it, I think it's a very cute, enjoyable film. For me, I love the story. I think it has a lot of heart behind it, and I like the way that this film tackles the coming-of-age experience and puberty, while also having that amusing angle where we incorporate this giant red panda into the narrative. Not only that, but we have the greatest boy band of all time in Turning Red, Four Town, who I hope one day actually does some level of a tour. I would go see that in a heartbeat, Four Town live and in person. At number 11, I have Toy Story 4. After Toy Story 3 kind of perfectly ended the Toy Story franchise, I kind of was ready to move on from the franchise, but Toy Story 4 was able to win me back over with a fantastic new story. For me, it showcased that the magic for these characters were still there. It never gets old seeing these characters and the hijinks they get into, but the emotional exploration of Woody really tugged at my heartstrings watching this, especially as an adult. Plus, the new cast of characters are pretty great too, but with what we saw in Toy Story 4, it has me intrigued on where we could go with a potential Toy Story 5, which we now know we're definitely getting. At number 10, I have Soul. So much about this film resonated deeply with me due to the mature themes of the material. It delves deep into life in general, while filling out the tale with an awesome, entertaining story at the core of the adventure. Plus, I just love the use of music in the narrative. I thought everything about this was perfect. I do think it does hit a lot harder for people that are older. The story necessarily isn't geared as much towards a younger audience, but you can definitely still get stuff out of it if you're younger. At number 9, I have Ratatouille. These are the type of crazy swings that I love from Pixar, especially when they succeed this well. And it also showcases why Brad Bird is one of my favorite directors, because somehow he was able to take such a wild concept that sounds pretty strange and twist it into this awesome film with tons of laughs, but also great themes that revolve around pursuing something that you're passionate about, which I think many people can relate to. At number 8, I have Inside Out. Once again, a very strange idea and concept. A film that centers around basically the emotions inside of your body as these tiny little animated characters, and it's such a fun, hilarious time thanks to the ensemble cast assembled being pretty much one of the best ensemble casts ever assembled for a Pixar film. All of them work perfectly together and showcase their respective characters and how different they are. It's a blast. Pete Docter is one of my favorite directors at Pixar, and this isn't my favorite Pete Docter film, but it is a very good one. Because number 7, Monsters, Inc. is my favorite Pete Docter film. I adore everything about Monsters, Inc. It's one of those films in Pixar, actually, I quote the most. It's such a classic with such interesting ideas behind it. It's so creative with the monster plot thread. Sully and Mike's friendship is just pure perfection. They're one of my favorite duos in Pixar. I love everything about them when they're together, and Boo as well. She is an adorable addition to their crew, and her addition to the film also works on an emotional level by the film's end. At number 6, I have Toy Story 2, easily by far one of my favorite Pixar sequels. It's such an entertaining, albeit simple adventure, but I actually quite enjoy the simplicity of this one, centering around a rescue mission to save Woody while Woody's dealing with his own problems with Jessie and the Prospector. It balances all the fun Pixar elements well with the emotional ones, like Jessie's part in the story and getting to see her origin story set to that extremely depressing Sarah McLachlan song that I don't know how you watch that scene without crying. It still is surreal after all these years that we almost didn't even have this Toy Story 2 because they almost lost it, and one woman saved the day and came in and had the files to restore the film, and they just recently laid her off, which also I think is completely ridiculous. It's truly a shame. She's the MVP. She deserves a statue or something for her efforts, because without her, we wouldn't even have this version of Toy Story 2 to enjoy. At number 5, I have Finding Nemo. Once again, another Pixar film that I consider a classic. It has all the magic in full swing, delightful, eccentric characters that you can't help but fall in love with, and they're also memorable. On top of the fact you have this excellent adventure. It's one of those Pixar films that I rewatch a lot, another one that I quote a whole lot, most of Dory's lines to be honest. That and Shark Bait Ooh Ah Ah, that has also been my favorite since this film released. It's also just a stunning film to look at. It's colorful, vibrant, like the best of Pixar, the messaging in its story cuts deep to me. Whether you're Marlin or Nemo, there's always something to gain from the different perspective, and I think it is one of those testaments to Pixar. Whether you're Marlin as a father or Nemo as a child, you get a different perspective about the story, and that is the best kind of storytelling in my opinion. At number 4, I have Toy Story 3. Obviously now we have multiple follow-ups in some shape or form to Toy Story, whether it be Toy Story 4 or Lightyear, but still, in retrospect, I think Toy Story 3 is a perfect wrap-up for the trilogy. The emotions are so high all throughout this great adventure, with a surprisingly high level of stakes with our poor characters stuck inside of this daycare. Growing up with these characters, it wasn't that hard to continue to be invested in everything that happened with them, but I was still pretty emotional when there's sequences in Toy Story 3 where it looked like the characters are gonna just burn to death. Regardless of the fact that Disney kind of went overboard for a while there with the surprise evil villain, Lotso, I think, is one of the best examples of that twist and how effective it can be, because he was a surprisingly menacing villain for being so adorable. Of course, now the story has continued on, so it isn't a conclusion per se, but it is a conclusion for Andy's arc, and I think that is what hits deeper, because someone like myself and many others grew up much like Andy around the same age, and this felt like the end of an era once he gave the toys to Bonnie for their next adventure. At number 3, I have Coco, easily by far my favorite of the more recent-ish Pixar films. I say recent-ish because it has been 6 years now, surprisingly. Everything about Coco I find so delightful. I love the journey that we go on in this with Miguel and Hector, as their journey not only just brings me so much joy, but packs on the emotion, tackling themes of family and death in such beautiful ways that you don't see in a lot of mainstream films. And also, just anytime I watch this film, there are just many moments where I tear up. The biggest one is towards the end when Miguel is singing Remember Me to Mama Coco. I don't know how you watch that and don't cry in some shape or form unless you just have a black hole where your heart's supposed to be. This might be a hot take or not, but I think Ernesto de la Cruz probably is one of the top tier Pixar villains, just because once you do get that big surprise reveal of him being the villain, while it is kind of obvious he's the bad guy, it's the backstory behind it makes you hate him even more. He's also one of the rare Pixar villains that actually killed somebody. At number 2, I have The Incredibles. It's a Pixar film, it's a superhero film. How can I not love this concept? Biases aside, it's just an awesome Pixar film. It has every perfect ingredient, the over-the-top hilarious moments, charismatic heroes and villains, and exciting, mind-blowing superhero action sequences. The family itself, the family dynamic, I think is excellent in The Incredibles. They're all eccentric and unique, and all their power sets are so cool. Looking for a plethora of exciting sequences when the family starts working together and using their powers against Syndrome, who is definitely an over-the-top villain, but I do think it works in the context of The Incredibles just because he hams it up so perfectly. Even the supporting characters in The Incredibles are fantastic, whether it's Frozone or the iconic Edna Mode, who is one of my favorite Pixar characters ever, and to this day, every time I see a cape on a superhero, I always yell no capes because of her. It's such a blast every time I throw it on, and this, for me at least, is the closest to a perfect Fantastic Four movie. If they emulate this for the upcoming MCU Fantastic Four, I'll be ecstatic. But at number 1, I have the first Toy Story. Is it an obvious pick to have it number 1? I definitely think so, but it's a masterpiece through and through. Instantly, when I watched Toy Story as a child, I fell in love with Toy Story, and everything about this film still holds up perfectly decades later. It's an excellent blend of ingredients that we've come to know as pretty much the Pixar formula. Ambitious animation, an exciting world, and great characters, but also just iconic duos. Woody and Buzz Lightyear, their dynamic is so charming, and even despite them butting heads at first, it's perfect on all fronts with the comedy, the action, the wonder, and I adore it. Even all these decades later, I still have that Pixar magic. But there you have it. That is my updated ranking for all the Pixar films from worst to best. It was a lot of fun talking to Pixar on the channel with you guys. And like I said previously, make sure you share your rankings down below in the comment section, because I can imagine with so many films at their disposal, everyone is going to have a very different list. It's going to be a lot of fun. Let's be respectful of everybody's list in the comment section, but make sure you share them down below. Let's talk some Pixar. As always, thank you guys so much for checking out the videos. I always do appreciate it. Make sure you like on the video and also subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Show update reviews, reactions, rankings, unboxings, and more. But next time, I'll see you guys later.